There is this young salesman on Wall Street. He's fidgety, nervous, doing everything he can to stay composed, because his boss isn't the kind of man you want to cross. Not in that building, not in that era, and certainly not if you hope to keep your job. His boss is one of the most powerful bankers in America, the kind of man whose footsteps alone could make interns straighten their posture. One day, the salesman notices something unusual. His boss's pants are unbuttoned. Wanting to spare him embarrassment, he discreetly walks over, gently pulls him aside, and quietly tells him what's wrong. But instead of gratitude, instead of even a hint of appreciation, the boss turns, looks him dead in the eye, and says two words he will never forget. "You're fired." It sounds ruthless, almost cartoonishly cruel, but what's stunning is that this man, this cold, unforgiving titan of finance, was known by a nickname that sounded soft and cheerful. Sunshine. Sunshine Charlie Mitchell. A cute nickname, given because of his optimism, his broad smile, and his annoyingly upbeat confidence in America's economic future. But beneath that glow lay a much darker story, one that would stretch across an entire nation, one that would touch millions of ordinary Americans, and one that would play a significant role in triggering one of the worst financial disasters in American history. In the early 1920s, Charlie Mitchell was 55 years old when a realization struck him, an idea that glimmered with opportunity. He saw something that most elite bankers at the time ignored: the masses. The average American worker, the clerk, the shopkeeper, the teacher, the factory hand. Back then, the respectable practice for upper-tier bankers was to focus on corporations and wealthy clients. That was where the real money lived. But Charlie had a different vision. He looked at New York City and saw 6 million people. 6 million ordinary Americans with modest savings, ambition, and a growing appetite for the good life. And Charlie understood them. He understood their dreams and their fears, because he had once been one of them. Born poor in an unimpressive suburb of Boston, raised without wealth or privilege, he knew what it felt like to want more and not know how to reach it. And now he wanted to use that insight, not necessarily to help them, but to turn those dreams into dollars, for himself, his bank, and his empire. Charlie's idea was bold and revolutionary. What if you could take the broad customer base of a commercial bank, the average Joe who deposited a paycheck every Friday, and turn them into investors? What if you could take the exotic high-margin securities that investment banks reserved for wealthy elites and start selling them to the masses? What if you could democratize Wall Street, not out of generosity, but because there was an untapped fortune lying in wait? And America, at that very moment, was changing. The end of World War I had unleashed a tidal wave of consumer spending unlike anything in the nation's history. For the first time, ordinary families had disposable income. Radios crackled to life in people's living rooms, automobiles rolled onto dusty streets, department stores expanded, and most importantly, credit became accessible. Americans were forming a new relationship with debt, consumer goods, and the idea of investing. The government's Liberty Bond campaigns during the war had introduced millions to the concept of financial instruments. People had learned what it meant to invest, and many had learned to trust those who sold investments. The foundation was being laid for what would soon become a national obsession, an addiction to speculation. And Charlie Mitchell was perfectly positioned to become America's most influential dealer. His first step was transforming National City Bank from a sleepy, traditional institution into something entirely new. Charlie created an affiliate called the National City Company, designed solely to sell stocks and bonds, while the parent bank continued handling deposits and loans. It was one of the earliest financial supermarkets, a hybrid creature that blurred the line between commercial banking and investment speculation. Charlie didn't stop there. He began assembling a sales force unlike anything the financial world had seen. Offices opened in 58 cities from coast to coast. 1,400 employees, 350 full-time salesmen, men who weren't bankers but door-to-door persuaders. They knocked on doors the same way vacuum cleaner salesmen did, except instead of offering to clean your carpet, they offered you a chance at a better life, at least on paper. Charlie trained them with ruthless precision. His sessions were brutal, humiliating, merciless. If performance slipped even a little, he berated them publicly. He pushed them to think of themselves not as financial professionals, but as soldiers in a national mission to bring Wall Street into every American household. Yet his masterstroke wasn't the salesman, it was advertising. In an age when newspapers and radio were regarded as pillars of truth, Americans believed ads were factual. So when National City's advertisements appeared in magazines and over the radio waves, dressed in reassuring language and beautiful imagery, people trusted them. The ads positioned the bank as a wise friend, a trusted advisor. They promised safety. They promised rigorous standards. They told ordinary Americans they could rely on National City's judgment the same way they relied on doctors or lawyers. And people believed every word. Before long, middle-class Americans who had never owned a single stock began investing retirement savings, college funds, inheritances, and life savings. Farmers mortgaged their land. Teachers put in everything they had. Immigrants who trusted the authority of an American bank handed over their savings without question. Greed played its role. So did fear. Fear of missing out, fear of watching neighbors get rich while you stood still. More than a few people would later say that the 1920s felt like standing outside a casino where everyone else was winning. You either walked in or you stayed poor. But what they didn't know, and what Charlie's team worked hard to hide, was that many of the securities being sold were essentially worthless. National City sold $15 billion worth of securities in 9 years. Stocks from automobile companies already collapsing, bonds from South American republics teetering on default, investments so risky that even the bank's internal memos admitted their potential failure. None of that mattered. Commissions kept flowing. Charlie's philosophy was simple: let the buyer beware. If people were foolish enough to trust a banker's smile, that was on them. Inside National City, the culture rewarded this thinking. Bonuses were tied to how much product you sold, not how good the product was. Between 1927 and 1929, Charlie himself earned more than $3.5 million. In an era where the average American earned less than $1,000 a year, Charlie's wealth made him almost mythic. His salesman knew exactly what he wanted: volume. Push the products. Close the deals. Don't worry about consequences. An investigator would later describe National City as a gigantic foolproof device for gambling freely with stockholders' money, taking enormous profits when gambles paid off, risking nothing when they failed. By 1928, storm clouds were forming over the American economy. The Federal Reserve expressed concern. European economists warned of a bubble. But none of that could compete with a booming chorus of optimism led by men like Sunshine Charlie, whose constant cheerfulness drowned out every cautionary voice. When the Fed tried to limit speculation, Charlie publicly defied them, announcing that National City would supply $25 million to fuel stock purchases anyway. Many hailed him as a hero, someone bold enough to fight back against the regulators. But in reality, it revealed how out of control Wall Street had become. Then came October 24, 1929, Black Thursday. The stock market opened in a free fall. Panic spread like wildfire. People rushed to sell before losing everything, but in doing so, they accelerated the collapse. Charlie sprinted to the offices of J.P. Morgan, where the most powerful bankers in America gathered in emergency session. Together, they assembled a $100 million pool to support the markets. Charlie walked out smiling, telling reporters everything was fine. But privately, he was terrified. National City's stock price was plummeting, and he was desperate to rescue a merger deal tied to his legacy. In a controversial move, he asked J.P. Morgan for $12 million to buy back National City shares and artificially inflate the price, an act that would later symbolize Wall Street arrogance and recklessness. As the crash intensified, Americans watched their savings vanish overnight. Farmers lost their farms. Families lost their homes. Widows lost everything. Letters poured into National City, pleas for help that went unanswered. As the Great Depression consumed the country, public rage turned toward the bankers who had fueled the disaster. By 1932, unemployment hit 25%. 5,000 banks collapsed. Congress launched investigations, but Wall Street executives weren't worried. They believed no lawyer could untangle their secrets. They were wrong. In January 1933, Ferdinand Pecora was appointed as chief counsel for the investigation. A relentless prosecutor with deep financial knowledge, Pecora was everything the bankers feared. When Charlie Mitchell walked into the Senate hearing room on February 21st, he expected to breeze through it. Instead, Pecora had spent days combing through National City's internal documents, and he had found everything he needed. For 4 hours, he dismantled Charlie's legacy, exposing fraudulent practices, hidden risks, and lavish bonuses. And then came the fatal blow. Pecora revealed that Charlie had executed a sham transaction to evade taxes on his 1929 bonuses. He had sold millions of dollars of stock to his wife to create an artificial loss, then quietly bought the shares back. It was blatant tax evasion at the height of a national crisis. The country erupted in outrage. Newspapers ran front-page stories. Political cartoons portrayed him as a vulture feasting on ruined families. The man once seen as a financial genius was now the villain of the Great Depression. Within days, National City's board forced him to resign. His empire crumbled. But the consequences went far beyond Charlie. His downfall fueled the political momentum needed to reshape American finance. The Glass-Steagall Act separated commercial and investment banking. The Securities Act mandated honest disclosures. The reforms didn't erase the damage, but they protected future generations from the worst abuses. Charlie Mitchell spent his final years in quiet obscurity, advising clients and attempting to rebuild his reputation. He never fully admitted his wrongdoing. He insisted he was unfairly blamed for an economic disaster bigger than any one man. He died in 1955 at the age of 77, largely forgotten, but not forgiven by history. Yet his story lives on as a powerful warning about what happens when financial institutions place profit over people, when regulators look the other way, and when charismatic, optimistic salesmen convince ordinary Americans to gamble their futures. Sunshine Charlie believed he was bringing Wall Street to the people. In reality, he brought them to the edge of ruin. And although he is gone, the financial strategies he pioneered, the emotional persuasion, the mass marketing, the blending of banking and salesmanship, continue to echo through modern crises, from subprime mortgages to speculative bubbles. If you made it all the way through this story, leave a sunshine emoji in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe, check out the channel newsletter through the QR code, and if you want a fascinating contrast to Charlie Mitchell, watch the video on Jesse Livermore, a man who played the market in almost the opposite way but made a fortune doing it. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.